Fallout 4 has always been a game with a lot of secrets or mysteries. Although, in the almost now 5 years since the game's release, one secret has risen above the rest, and that is Todd Howard's terminal secret, which has spawned hours of discussion, many YouTube videos, articles, and of course, a wide variety of Reddit posts. But in this video, I want to explain to you why I think I actually solved the terminal secret in its entirety, and I could tell you almost definitively what was the secret Todd Howard was referring to. So for a little bit of background on this, some context as to the secret overall. Fallout 4 released in November of 2015. I'm sure many of us enjoyed it back at that time. And over the next 4 months, people are playing the game, making mods for the game, and even replaying the game and digging through its files. Yet somehow, despite all of this digging and discussion of the lore, by March of 2016 at the DICE Summit, we did hear this.
Have you run into anything yet where you're like, God, I really wanted someone to do this, but nobody's found this or this or this? Or nobody's...
There's a couple things, but I don't want to say them yet. They eventually will find them. There's one really good one that no one's really talked about.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Give us a hint. Do you have a pool going? Is there money involved or people gambling?
It's in a terminal somewhere, but yeah.
So now when this news broke, it was big. Now many fans, already 4 months deep into Fallout 4, had thought they had uncovered just about everything. There were hundreds of mods available at the time, pages on the wiki for nearly every terminal entry, and even some things uncut content. Yet according to Todd Howard, the project lead and director of the studio, there was still something we didn't figure out. And as you could imagine, immediately following this, there were YouTube videos, Reddit posts, and all kinds of speculation as to what exactly the secret was. But this obviously had to be a unique one. Was the terminal a literal Fallout terminal where it was just a terminal entry someone missed? Or perhaps something more abstract like an airport terminal in Fallout 4, a more physical representation of a terminal, not just a digital entry? The most confusing part, of course, being what was the secret that nobody figured it out yet? Did Todd Howard just miss the Reddit post that it mentioned, or did somebody actually not post about it yet? Whatever the answer, by 2018 we did have our next update. As a user on Twitter asked Pete Hines, did anybody ever find that crazy Fallout 4 secret Todd was talking about a while back? To which Pete Hines responds, yes. And then in a follow-up, somebody else asks, well, now I'm curious as to what that secret was. Something about a terminal no one had found yet? What terminal? Wherein we do hear the terminal wasn't important. The thing he was referring to has been discussed in the community already, in forums, Reddit, etc. And since then, we've heard nothing. No further clarification or confirmation as to what it is or isn't, and there's been a ton of speculation and theorizing as to which of the theories was the right one. And of course, which of the theories involved the terminal, but the terminal wasn't the core or most important part. It went beyond the terminal, but also nobody figured out between November of 2015 and March of 2016. We had some unique characteristics and we had to find what exactly fit this. There's some speculation it was around Fallout 76, as there's actually a terminal where you could access this Greenbrier radio signal, the Greenbrier being a hotel in Fallout 76 and a very notable landmark for that game. Bethesda likes to tease future titles, so maybe that was it. Or even alternatively, something I speculated on last year, that it was Pam starting the Great War. Who exactly started the Great War has been a big back and forth in Fallout lore, and there's some terminals describing how China launched 4 nukes at the US, and then speculation that maybe Pam actually was the one to create those terminal entries, falsifying China starting it so the US responded to that, but effectively Pam started it. But I'm here to tell you today that I don't think it's either of those. What I think the big secret that Todd Howard was referring to was actually that the player character in Fallout 4, the sole survivor, is a synth. And let me explain why exactly this fits this criteria almost perfectly. When discussion of the secret comes up, the player character being a synth almost always follows in that discussion. You can find it on almost all of the posts discussing this. All my videos discussing the secret have included that theory, but I've almost always ruled it out because it just doesn't really make a ton of sense. One of the big pieces of evidence, one of the big terminal entries we can point towards as far as the player character being a synth, is in the Institute Robotics Lab. In Terminal 2, you could find the subsection known as Project Updates and a specific one labeled Unique Project. I'm sure some of you have seen this one in the past, but just to recap quickly. Overriding directive to not alter a synth's basic functioning notwithstanding, Father has granted clearance for a rather unique project. In select Gen 3 units, the synthetic brain is indeed capable capable of accepting specific enhancements to the visual cortex, basal ganglia, and right parietal cortex. The result is substantially improved combat effectiveness due to two factors. One, an increased understanding of weapon accuracy to the extent that the combatant can actually visualize the percentage of effectively hitting targets or smaller areas on those targets. Two, an altered sense of perception that mimics the effects of slowing or even stopping time. Recommend we commence surgery and field trials on appropriate operatives in the near future. So basically, this was the kind of newer project with the Institute or something in testing on Gen 3 synths where they would effectively have VATS, wherein they could focus certain limbs and see a percent chance to hit them, or slow time like in Fallout 4 VATS, or even freeze time like in VATS with past games. This theory gained more traction around the player character being a synth, as when you start Fallout 4, you could use VATS right off the bat, despite the fact the lore explanation for VATS in nearly all Fallout games is it requires the Pip-Boy, but for some reason we can use VATS before we get the Pip-Boy. So that's the explanation as to how this comes into the discussion of it being the Fallout 4 secret Todd Howard was talking about. But then you might ask, well, okay, if that is true, why wouldn't it be discovered between November of 2015 and March of 2016? And that's a very important question, with the answer being you couldn't find it. It wasn't in game between November of 2015 and March of 2016, a simple fact that I think most people have overlooked, including myself up until now. Going back through old discussions of what the Fallout 4 secret was, I was trying to uncover what exactly wasn't talked about between those two dates, because if we figured out what that was, we'd be able to uncover pretty definitively what the secret would be. But even still, Todd Howard was aware of it between those two dates. And something very interesting I discovered was that the first iteration of people actually talking about this terminal entry from the Institute Robotics Lab came on the 28th of June in 2016. And I immediately found this to be weird. I tried to search more, but I couldn't find any earlier talks of this, and certainly not in November or December of 2015 when the game released. With how big this terminal entry was, with the theorizing that the player character is a synth, it definitely seems like somebody would have picked up on it. And even since the release of this game, people are theorizing the player was a synth, so why was this not in those posts? I did some more digging on the Fallout Wiki, which contains all of the terminal entries for the Institute terminals, and I found this actually wasn't on the original version of that page, which was created in January of 2016. Based on some of the discussion, it seems like they just kind of data mined all of the terminal entries from the game, but for one reason or another, the whole project update subcategory from this terminal is nowhere represented on the Fallout Wiki until mid-2019, literally just 1 year ago. So clearly something was up. Either somebody on the wiki just totally forgot this specific terminal entry, the one in question around this theory, or something odd was going on with it. Next up, I dug through a ton of old Fallout footage, watching hours of people exploring the Institute for the first time back in early 2016 and late in 2015, until I finally found somebody who went up to this terminal and looked at it. And what you could see is in December of 2015, the project updates section was not on the Institute Robotics Lab terminal. So the next question was, okay, when was it added and how did nobody realize? Even still, I can't find a single post or Reddit thread describing how some new entries were added to this terminal. It seems like everyone just kind of took it for granted when it went live. But as you launch up the creation kit, the full story does become quite clear. And if you're not familiar, the creation kit is the main Fallout 4 editing tool, an official tool from Bethesda. As you access this terminal in vanilla Fallout 4, what you'll find is that all of the entries are technically listed there, including the entry on Gen 3 synths having VATS and the two other in the project updates subcategory. But what it seems like happened was Bethesda forgot to add project updates to the main section of the terminal. So technically the information is in the terminal, you just have no way to click on it because they forgot to add a menu option. And now when was this finally added? In May of 2016, when the Far Harbor DLC was released for Fallout 4. And even still, if you play Fallout 4 without Far Harbor, just vanilla Fallout 4, you will not have these terminal entries. But once you install Far Harbor, you will see them pop up. And what it seems like happened was Bethesda just forgot to turn them on. There are 3 entries in total, one describing how from time to time Gen 3 synths will malfunction, and they're launching an investigation into that. Plans to start phasing out Gen 1 synths, and how Phase 3 is the ultimate future, and Gen 2 units will also be phased out at some point in the future. And of course, lastly, our famous terminal entry about Gen 3 synths having VATS, or an equivalent of VATS being applied to them. So maybe some of you still aren't convinced. You think, well, maybe it was always intended to be a part of Far Harbor's DLC. There's a lot of other discussion in Far Harbor about synths and you being a synth, but this fits so perfectly. Something that would be a big theory and ended up being a big theory. It's just Bethesda forgot to turn it on, but Todd Howard was aware of it. Maybe he even wrote this specific terminal entry as a little Easter egg, and he was confused as to how the player character being a synth wasn't getting more attention, or how synths have VATS was getting more attention, or even the 2 other terminal entries. Although yes, maybe this 3rd one does make sense to go live with Far Harbor, the first 2, with phasing out Gen 1 synths and even some Gen 3 synths malfunctioning, don't inherently fit in with Far Harbor itself, and actually, again, we're in the game since day 1. All 3 of these terminal entries were unedited when they finally went live since when Fallout 4 came out. So it fits in with Todd Howard's description, but also with Pete Hines in that this terminal entry isn't the entire theory. There's more to it than just this one entry, as many other aspects or things in Fallout 4 do somewhat allude to or make you question whether or not you as the player are a synth. And to be clear, I don't think this means the player's a synth. This is hard confirmation. No, but what I think this does mean is it's something Bethesda wanted us to question. A little theory or mystery they put into the background that people were intended to theorize about. They just forgot to turn on one of the terminal entries, at least right off the bat. And honestly, just overall, I find this whole thing to be kind of hilarious. It is so Bethesda to have this giant mystery be a result of them accidentally forgetting to turn on the core terminal entry 4. And for me at least, I am 100% convinced that this was the terminal Todd Howard was referring to. It again fits all of the criteria. But for those of you that are still curious around the larger theory, why do some people think the sole survivor is a synth in Fallout 4? You do have using VATS right off the bat, and then this terminal entry mentioning that Gen 3 synths could use VATS. A Gen 3 synth is pretty unique. You're not a robot like you see with some of these other synths, but you're actually lab grown. You're more or less indistinguishable from a real human outside of being killed and having a synth component, and you do have legit bones, muscles, and other tissues. That's what you actually see happening in the robotics lab of the Institute where this terminal was located. And in some ways, it's almost easier to think about these as clones with advanced capabilities than raw synths. But the theory is that we died in the cryopod. If you return to Vault 111 in Fallout 4, you will find that everyone else is dead, but magically somehow we survived. The lore explanation is that they needed multiple copies of Sean's DNA, so they left us alive. But what if that's just the explanation so we don't start thinking we're a synth? We don't become self-aware of that aspect. What if when Sean was taken, we were also taken? Or maybe shortly thereafter, when Sean's DNA ended up working, they just terminated us. As Sean grows up, becomes director of the Institute, he's going to recreate the singular 2 people he's familiar with, his father and his mother. And to him, from the Institute perspective, we could just be an experiment. Create somebody who thinks they are from the pre-war and monitor them closely, seeing what they do in this now post-apocalyptic world. There's a lot of speculation that a cut quest from Fallout 4 was Synthetic Love, which is based off the naming and some of the imagery would be where the main player character actually meets a synth version of their spouse, whether it be Nate or Nora, which could lend a bit of credence to this theory or idea that we actually were a synth. And of course, the overall nature of Far Harbor, where clearly Bethesda intends for us to question the nature of our reality. It even brings up how we only have memories dating back a limited amount of time. How come we can't remember everything if we are a person who actually does have memories? Unless maybe our existing memories are implanted or not real at all. Overall, when it comes to this theory, there are definitely other videos or posts that explain it way more in depth. It really wasn't the intention of this one. As if you ask me, based off everything we have thus far, I don't think we're meant to believe we actually are a synth, but I think that plotline, that doubt instilled in us, is intentional from Bethesda. Whether or not the player character is a synth, and some minor evidence here or there that it could be true, was direct, and it's definitely meant to be there. And hence, it would be one of the big things to come out around Fallout 4 as a fan theory, and it ended up being one of the most popular or well-known fan theories, and clearly was explored much more in depth with Far Harbor. But either way, hopefully you guys found this video informative. It was certainly a lot of fun to make. It'll probably be the last time I talk about this one, unless we get some actual official confirmation that I'm right or wrong, but let's hope it's not that. As always, again, I thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this one, but until next time, I hope to see you all next time. Later.